Hi, and welcome to part two of our three-part series, Rise of the Digital Salesforce, where we explore topics and best practices on how organizations and their sales leadership are adapting to selling in a digital-first world. I'll be your host, Rashmi Vittal, CMO at Conversica, the leader in intelligent virtual assistants that help organizations attract, acquire, and grow their customers at scale. And today's topic is really focused on how field sales is the new inside sales. The way salespeople engage with leads and prospects have really changed dramatically over the past year. And inside sales reps who used to field inquiries and close deals in an office environment are now handling the majority of their interactions online. And field sales is wrestling with adapting to a completely virtual sales cycle, making both teams more inside now than ever before. I am delighted to be joined today by Mike Pregler, Vice President and Research Director at Forrester. Mike is an award-winning sales and marketing thought leader with 30 years of experience in global high-tech company. He has held leadership positions in sales, sales operations, and marketing with proven success in growing revenue while increasing sales productivity and performance. Prior to joining Serious Decisions, now Forrester, Mike was Global Vice President of Demand Planning and Sales Operations at SAP. Mike, thank you for joining us today. All right.
Thanks, Rashmi. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So let's kick things off with hey, we're coming up on 1 year. I think March 11th will forever be ingrained in my head because that's when California went into lockdown. But how has the sellers landscape changed?
Yeah, so Rashmi, really, the sellers in the past year, the sellers landscape has changed dramatically. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but also look backwards at some of the trends that we saw coming. If you think about sales leaders in the past, traditionally, the approach that we all used was to focus on talent, hiring and recruiting the best talent that we could get, and also the most talent that we could get. That's what sales leaders really focused on as their primary growth strategies. Can I get better reps and more reps? And we always look for that sales rep, that heroic sales rep that could carry the day of an engagement with a client. Get on a plane at a moment's notice, go see the prospect or the client, and have that cool charisma that they could solve any challenge and get us through any difficult scenario. And really, what's happened is 2020 hit, and that really changed the dynamic. And if you can slide forward one. And what we saw in 2020, obviously, and you mentioned the March 11th date, also similar for me here in Pennsylvania. The difference is that we all had this face this adversity, certainly adversity in our personal lives, but of course in the business life, and that really changed a number of things. Organizations had to adapt to this new adversity. And what we found really is, if you could step forward one more slide, is that it revealed a number of things about many of our organizations, and certainly that most of our reps and most of the organizations were not prepared for this transition to a purely virtual environment. So that really set up a challenge for us and something that we had to adapt to very quickly. And now, really going on nearly a year since, we are in the new normal. And we've had to adapt our organizations, our processes, and our people to really thrive in this new normal. But let's go back and take a look at some things. And what we at Forrester Serious Decisions do is we work with our clients to, especially our sales advisory clients, to do a sales activity study. And we measure where sales reps and sales professionals are spending their time during the course of a particular week. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've surveyed over 25, and we measure that time that they're using in the selling activities when they're directly engaged in core selling activities directly with the client, which is about 25% of their time. We found that certainly in 2020, the majority of their activity was virtual. The way they engage with clients via email, web, phone, or face to face, almost 88% was virtual. But we took a look back at our studies prior to 2020 in the pre pandemic days. And actually, what we found there is the new normal's not so new. When we were looking at field sales reps, the reps that are supposedly out into the field and engaging with clients face to face, we found that really about 74% of their time was also virtual, again, using web, email, and phone. Now, of course, what changed dramatically was in that mix is the explosion of web technologies like Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, WebEx, and other virtual technologies. But really, we saw that this was a trend that was already in motion. And 2020 was really an accelerant, a catalyst to shift towards much more of a predominantly inside or virtual selling experience.
And that's really interesting, Mike. And I think one of the questions I'd have is, how are sales organizations managing, enabling that shift from a predominantly field-based sales to now an inside or virtual selling motion?
Yeah, Rashmi, the changes there are several that organizations have had to make along the way, and many are still on this evolution to this change. The first was to digitally enable their reps, and that was to give them the technology that they needed to survive in a virtual world. Many reps, as they moved ahead into into doing and selling via a virtual experience, they didn't have the webcams. They didn't have a home office. They didn't have high speed internet or Wi-Fi. So organizations really needed to invest in that technology to help them digitally enable their. Secondly, they have to enable their reps to take advantage of and thrive in a digital engagement. How do you work with and sell in a digital and virtual world? How do you engage your clients and prospects as you're talking to them through a digital experience? And there are techniques that all reps need to learn, and whether they're business development reps looking at prospecting or whether they're sales reps closing business. How do you engage in a digital experience with your clients? And what you're showing now is what we've found over the course of our we completed early last year was that within a B2B sales engagement, there are 18 meaningful interactions between buyers and sellers throughout the course of the buyer's journey. And actually, those touches are split evenly between human touches, whether it's phone or web or face to face, and non-human touches. For example, downloading a PDF file or white paper, attending a webcast, doing a web search. So organizations look at these 18 meaningful interactions, and first is that's a big number to understand how many interactions occur between buyers and sellers. But the other thing it does is it's an opportunity for us. Every one of those interactions allows us to collect the data and turn that into insights that we can then use as sellers to map to the buyer's journey. How do we want what reps do we want to engage in it? Who's the right responsible person, both in the early stage, top of funnel activities? Who are the best resources to deploy middle of the funnel and end of the funnel? And then what are the activities that need to go on throughout each of those stages? So really we're using data and technology to gain not only a competitive advantage for us as sellers, but to improve the buying and customer experience for our buyers.
And this is really interesting, Mike, and it's something that you and I have talked about is that's 18 meaningful interactions. I have to imagine that that increases
Mhm.
now that we know that the buying group can be made up of multiple contacts within an account. And so I could also see this even growing as a selling motion or sales rep is able to penetrate within an account. We know that on average it's about 8 to 9 contacts within an account to really make sure that you're, kind of driving the message and driving the progress and building the value across the organization.
Oh, absolutely. If in the traditional approach of trying to work with a prospect, maybe identify a lead, a single individual lead, and pass that over to sales, and then sales work with that in. But what really is that most B2B buying engagements are buying groups, and with many different participants with different roles within that. So really, this number of interactions is growing because now we're helping organizations engage with those multiple different personas that are involved in a decision.
Makes perfect sense. And if we think about this, how are organized using then this data and insights to transform their sales processes?
Yeah, Rashmi. So the first thing they're looking at is when you look at these interactions, is mapping that to your sales process and sales methodology. And then that helps guide you with what activities or what actions should be taken throughout each step of the buyer's journey. And then organizations are also looking at to say which are the right resources to perform those actions or activities, and where do those resources need to be applied throughout the buyer's journey. And what they're finding is that in different stages, particularly in top of funnel, is that there are ways to identify and use either dedicated roles or dedicated technology to help engage those buyers early on in the process, and capture them and bring them into our funnel in a really cost efficient way, but also with a great buyer experience to help get them started on their buyer's journey.
And I find this really fascinating, and I still think there's a lot of work here that needs to be done. But I don't think there's any shortage of data and insights we can deliver to a sales organization or help infuse directly in their sales process. I think one of the things that I've seen, and I'm wondering if you've seen this as well, is there too much data that we give to sales folks, and our sales teams really able to, do they know how to truly utilize the data so it could work on their behalf? I mean, there's one thing about preparing it and presenting it and then sharing the insights. Another thing about being able to receive those insights
Mhm.
and then have that actually influence your sales process. Where do you think organizations are today, kind of on that spectrum, in being able to really adopt and then adapt to those data insights that they're getting?
Yeah, great question. You're absolutely right. Is that many reps are struggling with an overwhelming amount of information, but not really true insights to how to move that forward. In those sales activity studies that I talked about earlier, about where sales reps are spending their time, I actually find that about 40% of reps' time is really spent finding the right content, or finding content that they can share with their buyers. So 40% of a rep's time, which averages about 55 hours a week, is spent finding content. But what we're finding, organizations that are really on the cutting edge, and really finding success, is that they use the data and insights about these activities and engagements they have with buyers, and they take that data and tie that to the outcomes, to the outcome you expect of either a won or loss opportunity, or throughout the stages, is are you moving buyers through the different stages in your sales process. So now you can tie those activities that and the content that your reps use to the outcome that you're hoping for. So now the best organizations can start to identify what are the next best actions that they can recommend to their reps that really move their buyers through the buyer's journey and ultimately result in a one opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there is literally, you have to be very prescriptive with the application of those insights directly into the
Mhm.
sales process, and where they're viewing that sales process that's keeping them intact. And at least a good thing, I mean, you and I have been around this industry for a while. I mean, we see,
Mhm.
we've seen people just predominantly use spreadsheets to track, to manage their sales organizations, to at least now see CRM solutions being there to utilize, to keep track of their sales processes. But still, that spreadsheet still pops up every now and again. But that being said, I think the more that you can keep it within the environment that the sales teams are used to operating in, and the more prescriptive, I mean, literally prescriptive, that next step needs to be for them, I think the better utilized that data is going to be in the long run. And then to your point, helping sales teams achieve their outcomes, you know, more readily. So that kind of moves on
Absolutely. Yes, that's
to
exactly right.
then it kind of moves on a little bit to then kind of buyers. Like, you know, we've been talking a lot about sellers
Mhm.
and their experience in adapting to virtual selling scenarios and remote selling scenarios, and using data and technology to be able to better inform and equip them. What about the buyers?
Yeah, so as we started out, we talked a little bit about the, the impact on sellers and what it takes to transform to that virtual experience. But really, we all have to take a step back and look at what are buyers expecting, and not just what are buyers expecting in the virtual experience, but what are they expecting in an overall buying experience. And early last year, we completed a buyer survey and understanding it, what are B2B buyers expecting from B2B sellers. And we found that those all their expectations, what they want out of that buying experience, fell into four categories. And all of these fit very neatly into the transition that we've now made to the new normal of more of a virtual experience. So the first element was open. The buyers wanted an open experience with their sellers, which means they want more transparency to information, data, customer references, and the way that your solution can help address and solve their business problems. Um, Certainly today, there is a lot more information that's readily available via searches, via online tools. And the buyers are expecting that experience to continue as they engage with sellers. The second area is that they want a connected experience. They want to be connected to the seller, and they want to ensure that the seller is connected to the business outcomes that they expect. They want to have shared goals through every stage of the buying cycle, whether it's top of funnel, whether just learning and becoming educated about your product, to the middle of the funnel, where they're really getting into the expectation of learning in depth of what their solution can do to help address their business outcome. And then ultimately the buying experience, and then the consumption and adoption and rollout experience. They want a fully connected experience where you as the seller are engaged with shared goals throughout that process. And then third, they want an intuitive experience. I mentioned earlier that organizations are looking at the selling process and identifying different roles that can deliver different elements of that selling process. Maybe a technology early on at top of funnel, or business development reps that are working that, transitioning to account reps and customer success at the customer experience. But buyers expect that sellers know who they are and what their requirements are at every stage, so that there's a seamless handoff throughout that entire experience. And then finally, they want an immediate experience. Because there is so much data available, and because buyers are able to gather that information about your solution and what else is available in the market, they are coming into the selling process often much further down in the funnel, and they're more educated. So they expect a very immediate experience. And the virtual selling environment enables that, because we're able to respond more quickly with more of our resources to reach out to the buyers, gather a group of buyers and our own teams to put together a response in a much more immediate and quicker fashion. So, Rashmi, what's happened too now is now we need to take that expectation of what the buyers want and shift that into selling the way buyers want to buy. And that's something that often is a shift for us as sales leaders, is we're trying to focus on selling and what the outcome is from us and our expectations as sellers. But we really want to ensure that buyers are able to buy the way they want to buy. And the first element of that is that they want personalized and highly relevant solutions. They want to ensure that those solutions that we offer to them match the business outcomes that they expect and need. And so that really is the result in that from a seller imperative is that if we're focusing our solutions to address their specific business outcomes, again, a shared goal, then that will help us with increasing win rates. So, and then the next is because they're expecting and demanding a very immediate and fast cycle, they want a proactive engagement with between the buyer and seller. So the proactiveness is that as we use different resources, that they have that intuitive understanding of what the buyer wants because we've done our homework, we've done our research, we've looked at the data and insights we have throughout the process, and that will enable us to deliver that better experience at every stage of the buyer's journey. So that really increases overall sales productivity if we're able to leverage that data and insights throughout the process and focus again on business outcomes. And then finally, if you look at what we found again through some of our sales activity studies, we asked reps and selling professionals what, if anything, they found was actually an advantage in this new normal. And one of the advantages of selling in the virtual environment was they found it much easier to gather different resources throughout their organization and pull them together in a very quick way to engage with a client. It was much easier than everyone getting on a plane, scheduling a meeting weeks or months out, which is logistically difficult to do. But in a virtual environment, it's much faster, much easier. So we can respond to buyers in a much faster way. And so that also allows us to leverage a broader set of resources within our organization to improve the wisdom of a crowd from within your organization and deliver that wisdom, deliver those insights to, again, the customer and buyer experience.
And that makes a lot of sense, Mike. I mean, really, those areas between being open, connected, intuitive, and immediate, and then how that translates into buyers' expectations. I mean, it's very similar, right? What the seller needs to do and the buyer needs and what the buyer wants. If we can get better aligned across those channels, then it can really drive kind of, I think, efficiencies within this new virtual world, and then really create kind of a better experience at the end of the day for the buyer across their entire kind of buyer journey. What's really interesting that you mentioned that is, we here at Conversica have been on really focused on thinking about customer engagement and how it works and what works well and what doesn't work well. And one of the things that we've really come up into, and over the past 5 or 6 years, every year we conduct this study across 1,000 different accounts and across multiple industries. And basically what we've seen is that there's really, when you think about customer engagement today in the sales motion, it is highly inconsistent. And the reason why is because today it is largely human powered, right? And so if you think about a sales rep and the sales motion, even though they may have access to our CRM solution or data and insight, at the end of the day, they're the ones who are writing the emails, picking up the phone, getting on LinkedIn and trying to connect with their buyer. And what it is that you think about human sales customer engagement, it is the conversations and the actions that they're taking to qualify and manage and build value across the thousands of prospects and customers that they have. And what we found is that there's 4 pillars of of good customer engagement, right? And that kind of lend to what you were talking about. And these 4 pillars are, persistence. That means, how many times are you going to really touch your prospect in each contact? So if you're again in a buyer's group and you've got 5 or 6 people in that buyer's group, how persistently are you going to reach out to them over the course of time, even just to qualify? We see that there's a lot of inconsistencies. In fact, just human powered customer engagement alone, we see that on the companies that we researched, that 65% of companies only reached out anywhere from zero to 2 times, right, at the most. So 1 to 2 attempts in trying to reach out to a new lead that's coming in through the funnel. And we know that today, especially in COVID times, it's taking more like 11 to 15 touches to drive engagement. To your point, you had 18 across the course of an entire cycle. I think the second area that we're seeing is really around slow response times. 55% of companies that we surveyed took 9 hours or longer to respond to that initial inquiry or request. And we know through various research that we've seen, 83% of customers expect to engage with someone immediately after contacting a company. You yourself just mentioned that, in a slide before. And this is a thing. Like you've got that persistence and then that promptness, and it's building what I call that trust and that initial early trust in a relationship. If you can be quite responsive as people are coming in with an inquiry, you're going to have a better chance of capturing their interest. And I think third across that, as you're saying, to feel kind of open and connected with the buyer, you've got to drive a tremendous amount of personalization. And sadly, what we saw is that 70% of our companies failed to personalize at scale. Yes, sure, today, like adding a name in and maybe a decent subject line is table stakes, right? That's something you expect even of any average sales rep to be able to do. But when you take a look at it, there's really on every email, there's probably 5 elements of personalization that you have to consistently do between the subject line, sure, the name, but then the relevance within the body of the email, right? If they came off of a campaign, what campaign was it? Because it's related to a topic that they might be interested in. Can you relate to them on that topic? Is it knowing that this is actually coming from an actual person or persona, not a mass email, let's say from a nurture campaign? And then you want some sort of CTA, right? Something that's very compelling, some call to action. And so when you combine like these three things, if you have persistence, if you have promptness, and you have this level of personalization, then that's really what's going to help you drive performance. And even what we know today is in our research that poor performance still exists. Like only 12% of companies outreach. So whatever email they sent back to us in response to the lead inquiry that we provided, only 12% consistently landed in the primary inbox, meaning that the rest was going into like promotions or social or that kind of, or even into spam. And that's another key thing to think about is like, how can you drive really compelling engagement that's also going to perform? And so what you need is improved data. Sure, you need the right kind of email. You need to make sure your email addresses and your contact database is correct. And how do you help ensure that that's correct? And then you need good message quality. And when you have good optimized message quality, that's not only going to drive better deliverability into your inbox, but then also better engagement, actually eliciting responses back. Um, so as we think about it, right? So these are some of the challenges that are there. What are organizations doing to position themselves to meet the evolving expectations of their buyers and customers? What have you seen?
Yeah, Rashmi. So a couple of things, and I want to go back a little bit to 2 points you made earlier, is around persistence and promptness. As we look at uh, selling organizations trying to respond to those companies that are doing outreaches to them, or maybe in market, and we have to do an outreach for them, so we kind of say inbound or outbound engagement with a prospective buyer. And what we find is a couple of challenges that those organizations have. Well, first is poor targeting, and that's that the organization doesn't target the right audience or the right persona. But really, the second is under resourcing those organizations, and they don't have the capacity to really reach out to do that inbound or outbound engagement in that fully persistent way that you expect. The number of touches and outreaches that you must have in order to engage a buyer, and then also the responsiveness or the promptness that you mentioned. So they're looking at ways to, how do we enable that top of funnel team, whether it's building capacity either through human resources or potentially through technology. So organizations have to look at how do they meet those expectations of buyers early on for the immediateness, the intuitive understanding of what they're trying to solve, but also but to do that in a cost-efficient way. That's one of the third challenges we see is as organizations just look to scale their resources. You want to understand what are the right and most cost-efficient resources to execute every step along the way of the buyer's journey.
Yeah, and I totally couldn't agree more. And I think what's interesting is, Salesforce recently did a survey, and I think it was the state of the connected customer, and they're saying that
Mm,
when it comes to thinking outside of the box, you need to start really bringing in kind of those new technology advancements that allow you to drive better customer engagement. And in fact, 60% of
mm,
B2B business buyers said that they're open to having technologies like AI or AI powered solutions to help drive
mm,
and improve a customer engagement. And it probably is no surprise that of that 60%, 66% of those who are open to are millennials. Millennials now have entered into the workforce. Obviously, are well into the workforce this year. I think millennials hit the age
mm,
of 40, so they are in positions of decision making power. They are in positions where they are buying technology in their organization. They're in leadership positions, and so we have to understand that that is also a factor as well, because as we get into the younger generations that are coming into leadership positions, they're going to really lean heavily on a digital first foot, right? And they're going to be very
mm,
comfortable on that, and so organizations in general need to adapt to that. But what I found really interesting, 60% of B2B buyers are open to having AI powered solutions help drive their customer engagement, and we are actually seeing that quite a bit here. If we come now and think about, those issues that we were having with human customer engagement, and to the point that you made, what we find with sales organizations is that many of them are running into the issue of having a sales capacity challenge, where the number of people that they have cannot feasibly execute against those four pillars of good customer engagement consistently, and that they struggle with that. And there's many aspects of what they do. If you think about a business development rep or sales development rep, right, an SDR team, it's that team that's dedicated to taking a lot of times those inbound leads, and finding and qualifying opportunities for the sales reps. And so what they'll do is, they'll do this persistent outreach. They will try and set up a meeting and schedule a meeting for their rep, and then they move on to the next lead. And what we found is, a lot of times when you think the human element comes in, they're challenged. They don't have the time or the capacity, especially if the inbound machine that's generating these leads is overwhelming their sales team. I think also the thing that we found is, as a result of in 2020, is the fact that organizations, came under severe constraints in being able to build out their teams the way that they wanted to. They had severe constraints on their budget and their resources. And so, how can you create a force multiplier in augmenting your sales team so you could meet the capacity challenges without only having to use one tool in your tool belt to do that, which is just hiring a bunch of people to do it, right? And so this is where technology and people meet, and what we call the augmented workforce, where if you take people plus AI powered solutions or conversational AIs, like conversational AI solutions, and you bring them together, you're going to create that force multiplier that's going to drive sales productivity and performance. And on just kind of a side by side comparison, when you think about Conversica, which offers, intelligent virtual assistants, think of it as a more sophisticated cousin to a chatbot, right? It can actually engage in a natural two-way dialogue, interpret, understand the messages that it receives, and then respond back in kind. It doesn't, I was going to say it isn't human. It's not, but it's very human like, in the sense that it's super personalized, meaning that it can definitely consistently deliver a personalized message, but it's also very persistent, right? Um, if you configure it to say, we know in our best practices, it takes 11 to 15 touches and unique attempts to be able to elicit some form of engagement. well, then you know that every single time against every lead, um, an intelligent virtual assistant is going to do that. Second thing is promptness. The minute that that lead comes into, whether it's your CRM or marketing automation tool, Conversica will initiate that engagement. So nobody needs to probe it or prompt it or remind it. It's going to do it. It's not going to cherry pick between, I think these are great MQLs and I think these are not so good MQLs. And then when you get all those three things together, as I said, you drive performance. Not only are you going to touch every single lead that you send it our way and work it to the max capacity, but then what we're going to do is we actually have really strong deliverability and engagement metrics against that. I mean, pretty astronomical. And in some instances, we get anywhere from 10 to 25% engagement rate against the pool of leads that we work. And then we drive deliverability really well. I mean, we hit the inbox, well over 85 to 90% of the time. So that combining those two things, you're going to get the outreach in front of people there, and then the messages are strong enough that you're going to get them to read it and try and engage back with it. And so, when you think about this, Mike, and you think about these four things, how do you believe what do you think sales organizations should perceive this when they think about bringing in something like a conversational AI solution like Conversica alongside kind of that human engagement? Just even that notion of that. What do you think sales leaders will need to know in order to embrace that?
Yeah, so Rashmi, um, there's a few things that I think sales leaders are looking for in here. One of the key things that we've seen, especially that's been accelerated this year, is that sales leaders want to identify what are the right resources to apply at each stage along the selling process in the buyer's journey, and they look at that often with both a skill lens. Do I have the right skill in each stage that I want to leverage? And also a cost efficiency idea. Do I have, and am I applying that skill set, which may be very expensive, in the right ways? So where we have top of funnel activity, sales leaders are looking for, how do I deliver that right experience, but not use my most expensive resources, which are often the side sales now or field sales, to deliver that experience at the beginning of the process. So how can I do that in a more cost efficient way and still deliver the high quality funnel and pipeline that I need in order to fuel my business? So they're open to different ideas to how to make that process more efficient, both from a quality perspective, but also from a cost efficiency perspective. Looking for both of those things, because it's not as what we see today as a sales leader's responsibility is not just how do they not just getting to the number and achieving the results, but how are they getting to the number, and can they do that repeatably and consistently? So they need to build an entire revenue engine that can consistently and predictably achieve their results.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say that because we're seeing that as well. I mean, not only is it about turning leads into meetings and meetings into pipeline, right, and building healthier pipeline that helps you hit your numbers, but it's also doing it in a more efficient manner. And it's actually one of the kind of other secondary metrics we really engage. We know that on average, a single IVA can do the work of, let's say, 10 of 10 BDRs, right? On average, we know a single BDR can process maybe 1,500 contacts a year. A single intelligent virtual assistant, if you wanted it to, could process up to 2 million contacts a year. So that immediate scale of productivity is massive. Now, the cost savings that come with it are huge. And what we've seen with certain customers that we've dealt with, one in mind that comes to mind, it's right here also is a very formidable high tech company. As a result of the pandemic, they saw immediate increase because of the business that they do in their free trial and downloads. I mean, overwhelmingly number of free trial and downloads that came in. And, they did not have the sales capacity, the existing sales capacity to follow up with those, to see if those free trials will turn into active, purchase opportunities. At the same time, there was no way they could hire in the number of people that they would have needed to hire in to be able, and then take the 4 to 6 months to ramp them up to then address that sales, address all those leads. And there would have been something around the number of 300 new reps they would have had to have hired to do it. But it just, the timing and the need wasn't there. And so the question is, how could they have just on demand increased the capacity of their sales team so they could work all of those really legitimate leads and see which ones could become true purchase sales opportunities. And that's where we came in, and really help drive that for them. Again, our IVAs are currently doing the work, equivalency of 300 full-time employees. And so, if I was to calculate that out, you could see just the massive cost savings that are there. But that's on one extreme side of it, right? On average, you would think, right, we're seeing anywhere from 10 to 13 X in terms of that cost efficiency that you're getting using a single IVA. And in these times, that's going to matter a lot, because what's happening is, what you could do is, instead of what we're hearing directly from sales leaders is that they look at that and they go, wow, so I don't have to place my investment here, but in this part of the sales organization, I can go ahead and place my investment in other parts of the sales organization. I can hire more of these inside sales reps, these more highly qualified reps. I can feed them more highly qualified opportunities, such that it could just, again, drive more momentum into their sales cycle. So we're seeing both on the revenue side, obviously making a significant impact, but also on that cost saving side.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, Rashmi, is one of the things we see sales leaders struggle with is they start that top of funnel engine, the SDR, BDR team, is often they need to scale, and they need to scale quickly. So they need scalability and agility, but onboarding new reps in that environment, the sales development reps and business development reps, that's a process that they have to establish, is how do you onboard them and ramp them up to be to be productive. And the challenge also is that in those organizations, there's also a reasonably high turnover, certainly more turnover than there is once they become established sales reps. So that knowledge is always being turned over. So you have to continually manage exiting and recycling your team. So it's an ongoing challenge that sales leaders have to make sure that organization is productive and efficient.
Yeah, and it's so true. And the thing is, onboarding takes such a concerted effort and amount of time. And if you were kind of had your finance hat on, you can say, you have to look at that cost benefit analysis. And I think what we see is that, look, you have your sales team, and if they're on board and ready to go, but then you need to increase the productivity and performance over time, and you just can't afford to wait that traditional 4-6 months, before let's say a BDR gets ramped up and ready to go. You can use, again, you could decide how you want to split up your time, and you say, you know what, I think it's more important for us to bring in, double our sales team, or increase our sales team in this aspect. But know that if I don't have to grow my other part of my sales team as much, I can use technologies like an intelligent virtual assistant to help me do that. The important thing people think about, the other thing around, on the flip side, people go, gosh, I've heard so many horror stories that chatbot deployments taking a very long time, and sometimes they're often not successful. And what we've done here, and what we recognize that, and we say, you know what, we need to get this, one, into the hands of the line of business. We need to get this into, whether it's that marketing department or sales department, to drive. And two, we've got to make it really easy for them to get up and running quickly. And so where we put a lot of our emphasis here, and you don't see this in some other vendors, but where we put a lot of our emphasis is around getting a virtual assistant up and running in just a matter of weeks, right? In 2 weeks or less, we could get up and running. And the reason being is that we are indeed a lot into it already. So, what you see here right now is kind of Conversica in action. Yes, as a virtual assistant, it can initiate contact on its own. As a reply comes back, it will comprehend that reply. and really understand it. It will determine and decide kind of how to craft that response, send it back, but also what other actions it needs to take. But what you see on the blue kind of here highlighted in the blue are the conversations that the IVA will deliver. We have over 600 pre-built conversations for about 60 or 70 skills that we offer, assigned to 60 or 70 skills. That's built on top of 1900 phrase packages. Basically, what that means is we put in a lot of work to create a very robust skill and conversation library so that you get a trained and ready to go IVA on the day one of deployment. So it is not like a lot of people think, oh, it's AI. That means you've got to train it over months for it to get smart or get to be productive to the level that you want it to. In this case, you don't. Um, we've done that for you. It's already pre-trained. It has, because we're built on a SaaS-based application platform, we have the 3,400 IVAs preceding it. All of that knowledge is now crowdsourced into the next N+1 IVA that you add. So, when you think about the power of what AI can bring together, when you harness it together into an application like an intelligent virtual assistant, it's really tremendous. I don't know how many BDRs are out there that have over 10 years experience and 3,200 other kind of BDR years assigned to it to be able to do what it can do. But that's the power you get with AI. And so instead of seeing instead of taking 6 months to get ramped up, you can get ramped up in a couple of weeks and productive in day one. And that's a force multiplier that I think today's sales leaders just can't avoid. So when we think about this, just to kind of wrap up, I know we're coming up to the end of our time, Mike. I mean, we've covered a lot of areas here. We've talked about where sales folks are today. We've talked about what salespeople need to think about using data and technology, and then meeting the buyer truly of where they are in their own buying experience, and having and understanding how they can use now this digital landscape to advance sales opportunities in that virtual selling cycle. If there's one thing, like you as you're looking at all of this and you're thinking about it, if there's just one thing that you see will happen here in the course of 2021 when it comes to sales organizations and adapting to this digital first world, what do you think that one thing is?
The number one thing that we see as a trend is that most leaders are really responsible for, and I mentioned it earlier, is not just achieving their number and being successful in that, but building a revenue engine that can consistently and predictably and efficiently hit that number quarter over quarter, year over year. So what sales leaders need to do in order to accomplish that is really shift their focus and their approach from simply hiring the best talent, which is kind of the traditional approach of hiring the best talent and the most quantity of talent. That they're all the processes that are involved in their selling effort, from top of funnel, middle of funnel, to bottom of the funnel, and use data and insights to identify and design the most cost efficient processes, but also the most effective processes throughout that entire customer and buyer life cycle, and then apply those with the right resources in order to deliver the best customer and buyer experience, and also then, of course, to consistently and predictably achieve your revenue goals.
I love it. I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I think there's a lot to be learned there, and I know it's going to continue to evolve over time. And so, with that, Mike, I really appreciate you joining us here today. Love the research and the work that you've done thus far, and just it was really a fantastic dialogue. And so, thank you for participating here today.
You're welcome, Rash. We really enjoyed the conversation. It was great.
Awesome. And so for folks, we have just one more session here of our three-part series. Part 3, the rise of the digital sales force webinar series, and it's really about power to the outbound SDR. We talked a little bit about the SDR function here in this one, but we're going to dive into it more in part 3. So really hope you could join us. It's going to be scheduled for February 25th at 10 a.m. Pacific. Again, want to thank everybody for taking their time today. Mike, pleasure having you on, and thank you to Forrester for joining us here. And hope to see you all soon, especially at the next one, part 3. Thanks. Take care.